We look at this and we see a $2 to $3 trillion industry in a decade. If you look at this and you use the Dotcom parallel, that there's going to be a lot of companies that don't make it, but the ones that do are going to be generational opportunities. And that was sort of the bell went off when Kim Kardashian had that CBD-themed baby shower. I turned to my trader, I said, this can't be good for the space. And sure enough, that was pretty much the top tick at the end of April.
Hi, this is Tony Greer. I'm editor of the Morning Navigator Newsletter. I'm excited to have a conversation with Todd Harrison today, founder of CB1 Capital. Todd spent 7 years at Morgan Stanley as a derivatives trader. He worked at the Galleon Group. He ran trading for Kramer Berkowitz. He started an internet media company in 2003 called Minionville, and he won an Emmy Award. I'm excited to talk about global markets and cannabis markets with Todd today, so let's get started. Todd, thank you for joining me today and taking time away from your hedge fund, CB1 Capital. Why don't we start right in the cannabis patch today? Tell me about what's going on in the market. Tell me about CB1 Capital.
Sure. CB1 Capital, we're a hedge fund. We're investing in the cannabis space or cannabinoid wellness space across the U.S. We have some Canadian exposure, but really U.S., biotech, Australia, some Europe. We're looking out 3 to 5 years. We think the market is misunderstood here. Certainly the total addressable market and the use cases are misunderstood, so we're positioning to take advantage of that.
Got it. Full global cannabis hedge fund with a 3 to 5 year time horizon.
Yep.
Perfect. Let's segue right into what's going on outside the window today in cannabis, right? So the stocks are under pressure, and it seems like a pretty good time to talk about the cannabis market. Would you agree?
I would agree. I much prefer to come in and talk about these things when a lot of these stocks are down 40, 50% in the last month. A lot of that froth is off. So they're for sale, so it's a good time to be having this conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, and I've been treating this like the frontier market that it is, and sort of buying carefully but with confidence on dips.
Sure. So unpack that a little bit in terms of the strategy. I do agree. If you look at this and you use the Dotcom parallel, that there's going to be a lot of companies that don't make it, but the ones that do are going to be generational opportunities. And that's how we're looking at this. And trying to look through all this near-term volatility, it's a lot of retail holders right now, notoriously emotional retail holders that are moving with a herd mentality, which is why we're seeing these monolithic moves across the space. But I think if you can look out, call it 2 to 4 years now, whereas last year when we did this, it was 3 to 5 years, but 2 to 4 years now, where we look at the catalysts on the horizon, whether that's banking reform or whether that's broader decrim. But really at the state level, at the federal level, and at the international level through the UN, we think that we have a lot of regulatory arbitrages heading our way. So I do agree, if you can find the right companies with the right management and stick it out, you want to be buying into this with a 2 to 4 year horizon.
I would love to know if you think that's the strategy, but most importantly, I am sort of obsessed with your process of following the science, and it's been very good to me in following this sector. I would love to know what is on your mind lately in the science narrative.
In terms of the science, which I agree informs our decisions, and we look at the cannabis landscape really and say, okay, well, there's the CPG story, and everybody seems to, or at least starting to understand that more. That's beverages, nutraceuticals, cosmetics and vanity, pet supplements. There's a lot of there on the consumer side with a more traditional CPG model. And I think more people are starting to understand that this isn't about smoking cannabis, but about eating it and drinking it and rubbing it on and taking bubble baths in it. There's a lot of form factors that aren't going to provide those cardiovascular concerns that come along with smoking. That is starting to get unpacked right now on Wall Street. We're looking really through that, and what's going to take a bit longer from a tail standpoint is really that clinical evidence, right? As this moves from drugs from state dispensaries to medicine prescribed by doctors covered by insurance, that takes time. Right, there's clinical trials. There's over 100 clinical trials right now. So we saw GW last summer get the first FDA-approved plant-based medicine for childhood onset epilepsy. We think that that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of indications, and whether that is brain cancer or autism or traumatic brain injury or Alzheimer's, we think all of that is on the horizon. Obviously, as you can tell by the narrative, doctors want proof, obviously, before they get involved. So this has to go through that Western medicine protocol.
Is GW Pharmaceuticals' last earnings report pretty good evidence that Epidiolex is working, doctors are approving it, they're spreading the science. I mean, that was a pretty barn burner report.
We think so, but also remember that there was a lot of pent-up demand going into that, so I think that some of that is going to play out. But, we look at Epidiolex and we say this is terrific, and only 4% of treatment for childhood onset epilepsy is front door for cannabis. So the way they found this was really because nothing else was working for these parents, for their children.
Wow.
300 seizures a day in some cases, now disappearing or being occasional. And as we talk to these parents and they explain how this isn't just for the child, but for the whole family, when you have a child who's that ill, the whole family is just absorbed with that and consumed by that. So it's really, people talk about this as discretionary advice. We have these conversations, we're like, this is impact investing. We think that chasm between perception and reality has to close. The endocannabinoid system, it helps to regulate neurotransmissions, sort of a big deal. It was first discovered in the early 90s, call it 91, 92. I was graduating college. So this is not something that is well understood, and certainly the uptake in medical schools hasn't been there. So I think the medical community is starting to really understand the ECS. What the gap right now is the parallels between the plant, people, and pets, right? We all have an ECS. It helps to regulate our neurotransmissions. We produce what's called endocannabinoids to help do that. The cannabinoids found in cannabis, in the cases that we've been able to study, are identical in action to the cannabinoids or endocannabinoids your body produces. Everybody thought the runner's high for years was endorphins. We now understand it's an endocannabinoid. Identical in action to THC. So when you consume THC, same chemical process, same chemical reaction as when you get that runner's high internally. So, that part still needs to be understood by the medical community. That's the exciting part going forward is the health and the wellness benefits as this comes off the blacklist that it's been on for the last 90 years.
Yeah, totally. And I think that that's what the market is sort of missing. The good part about this frontier market is that there's no shortage of bears and there's no shortage of naysayers. And, it's amazing to me that people will rush in and buy something like Beyond Meat and they still want to be a naysayer in cannabis and say that the uptake for that won't be what the market is expecting, right? So I kind of believe differently because I believe that when it gets legalized and people have that as a legal choice, then, the growth will be even bigger than I think sell-side estimates are at this point. So that's where I think that we have a lot of opportunity now. Talk to me a little bit about another theme that you have in cannabis investing, and it's the opportunity to front-run mutual funds and hedge funds.
Right. Well, we think that we're going to see the bastardization of cannabis through the financial products lens. We're going to see a lot of ETFs. We're going to see a lot of hedge funds. We're going to see a lot of products, financial products that are going to have to buy the underlying stocks in these things. And, so when we talk about our strategy and people say, well, why are you, primarily in publicly traded securities when there's all this opportunity in private? We say, yes, the opportunity is there in private right now. The private to public market, that's a pretty good VIG from a valuation standpoint if you're right on your vehicle. But we look at this and say, okay, where's the puck going? We think institutions are going to articulate their cannabis strategy. They better understand it. They're going to articulate that cannabis strategy through publicly traded securities because that's how they do, right? They want their monthly NAV. They want those metrics. But what I think that they don't understand is really the ubiquity of the use cases. And we talked about CPG. We talked about the efficacy-driven solutions. Think about sustainable industrial use cases, hempcrete, plastic composites, biofuel, right? Millennials are going to want to, use that as their source, as their ingredient, we think, instead of some of these fossil fuels, instead of the pharmaceutical poison. So we think that's all in front of us. It's trying to keep loose grips on the handlebars right now with this volatility, with these bears, and understanding a lot of these companies aren't going to make it, right? But if you can find the companies that are, I think it's going to be generational in its cause and effect.
So what do you think is the, what do we need to look out for in terms of the banking acts that are coming on the horizon? I think those may be some of the biggest events that I can find on the cannabis calendar. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, two things. First, about the CBD, because obviously since the FDA meeting, a lot of these names have gotten crushed. C-Web, which is a name that we've started to build a position in, is down 55%.
Charlotte's Web, right.
Charlotte's Web, Lixinol, all of these names. We look at, 1933 Industries, another name. We own all of these companies that we started to buy into this because, paradoxically, as these rules and regulations are fleshed out, and we do think think there needs to be a pretty robust regulatory environment, right? There's a lot of labels and claims out there that are doing nobody any good, and a lot of times you're not even getting what you think that you're getting when you buy the product. So there needs to go through this regulatory process. But paradoxically, we think the existing players with topical solutions that are building brands, that are building distributions are going to stand to benefit, and those are the names that are getting hit the most right now. So we think there's a bit of an offsides there, but it's hard to sort of gauge that sentiment when it's all one way, as we saw late last year. But in terms of sort of the forward catalyst, and we say this now, it's June 13th, right, as we sit here, and these names are all for sale and pretty, pretty harshly, right? Everybody's kind of getting out. We've heard stories about generalist funds that are exiting the cannabis space, too volatile. They don't see the catalysts on the horizon. We do see catalysts on the horizon, but we, obviously, this is what we do for a living. We're looking for those catalysts. We think things like New York, which we'll hear about probably next week, or for sure by next week, by the 19th.
Yeah.
Nobody's expecting this. Cuomo said it's DOA. It's probably DOA.
Yeah.
But he's done a pretty nifty job of rope-a-doping the issue and lowering expectations. So I don't think anybody's expecting New York to pass, but certainly Illinois, having passed a few weeks ago, we think provides that roadmap for other states to adopt. And certainly from a tax revenue and job growth, most states need this right now. But we think that New York, we think Texas, the governor just signed a hemp bill, which is big. This was, I think, yesterday, and we have medical cannabis, potentially by this weekend. And then the SAFE Act should start to move its way through the House within a matter of weeks. This is big, right? Because if you can lower the cost of banking, allowing banking for cannabis will lower the cost of capital, allow for debt financing as opposed to equity offerings that are dilutive, and certainly is going to allow for the business to legitimize itself, within the states that they're operating in. We also think that it's big from a supply-demand standpoint, in that if these institutions are allowed to custody these assets, we think institutions will start to move into this space and start to accumulate equities, whereas right now it's pretty much 99.99% retail holders.
Right. So do you think that they're all going to have to wait until it's 100% legal at a federal level? And do you think that there is any chance of that during the Trump administration or not?
So I don't think legal is the way we want to look at it. I think decriminalization is probably a more apt forward path, right? Yeah. Leave it in the hands of the states. The infrastructure is there, plus you have the whole states' right issue. If we go down that path and we follow the precedent of online gambling, it's very similar. We think a parallel from a court standpoint that they would back the states' rights. We think it's a states' right issue anyway. So we think banking reform is probably most likely in this year. And certainly, as we look out next year, we do see a bit of serendipity with the WHO last year in November already saying that they recommend descheduling cannabis to the UN. The UN's never veered from a WHO recommendation. Interestingly, they sealed that recommendation until February and then said they didn't have enough time to review it by March. So they pushed it out to 2020, which seems to align with the US presidential election. I don't know. I mean, every Democratic candidate is running on this, right? Yeah. So it's the most populist issue of generations, most populist president, I think, in generations. I have a hard time seeing him let this kind of be used as a catalyst to get people to the polls for the other team. Right. So if the status quo remains status quo between here and there, I do think he tries to maybe sweep the leg and claim this. I think that would probably be a very intelligent political move, given the 96% support among the constituency for medical.
You just spoke a little bit about the branding, right? And that being one of the major ways to win over a client base. And so I have my ideas of what are sort of the coolest brands out there and names that we can trade. What are the names, in your opinion, that are building the strongest brands and are going to be, have the chance to survive in the cannabis markets in years to come? Yeah, no,
it's a loaded question because there's so much paper out there right now. There's so many brands out there right now. I think Paul Pierce just launched a brand, and I think every day I turn on the TV, the bell went off when Kim Kardashian had that CBD-themed baby shower. I turned to my to my trader. I said, this can't be good for the space. And sure enough, that was pretty much the top tick at the end of April. But, certainly there's going to be winners. We think Charlotte's Web as a terrific brand. We think Elixinol. We think Canahemp, which is a 1933 property. We own all these companies. So,
Okay.
talking my book, putting our money where our mouth is, right?
Yeah.
So
That's what I respect.
we think that there's, Canahemp, 1933, it's like a very under the radar situation. They have distribution through 46 states. So what you're looking at this point is you're looking for the integrity of management, yes, but you're also looking for the formulation, the product, bioavailability. You're looking for, a good product with solid distribution. And until we see that Banking Act allow for that marginal buyer, which we think is going to be a big gorilla,
Yeah.
or many big gorillas for that case. But until they're here, you're at the mercy of emotion in the retail space, and that's what we're going through now.
I think one of the eureka moments for me in terms of the full, wholehearted buy-in to the cannabis sector was sitting in CB1's office with you and Lauren DeFalco, your partner and co-founder, and listening to his CBD story and what he's been through, how he discovered it. Could you please tell us a little bit about that and tell us where your story fits in with that? Because I know there's a bit of a connection there, right?
Yeah, sure, and I hope I do it justice. Lauren is my partner, Lauren DeFalco, in the fund. He heads our research effort, and we found each other online, I guess about 4 years ago, and it was researching GW Pharmaceuticals, as the case may be, because we were both keen to explore the brain cancer trials, and this was a while back. We started to talk about the space, and he told me his story about how a decade earlier he was in an airport coming back from a business trip and collapsed and started seizing, and had never had those types of issues before. Long story short, had an EEG and found seizure activity in his brain. They started a protocol of many different medicines, and they told him at the time, he said, why this one versus that one? They said, we want to see which one has the least amount of side effects.
Right.
And in his words, it was a really onerous process and a really debilitating process. And, he started to research a company, GW, and learning about the anti-seizure properties and the trials they were doing, and adopted a high regimen cannabinoid diet, copious amounts of hemp, diet and exercise, which certainly, if you understand the ECS and the triggering, it has to be a part of a package deal. There's no shortcuts there.
Yeah.
But long story short, he went back a year later, and there was no more seizure activity in his brain. And he, right then, and this was about 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, he started to research this, and really just, all of it's behind him now. And he started to research the science. So he's been studying the science for a good decade, and there's been a lot of anecdotal stuff out there, obviously, because of the regulatory environment and the inability to really research cannabis. Like I said, that parallel between the plant, the people, and pets remains largely unknown unless you've actually experienced it, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're that part of that 1%, we'll call it, that's had this magical sort of reaction with this plant. When he told me this story, for me, it resonated because I came from a slightly different, place with this, and I worked right down, down the street from the towers. So when the planes hit back in 9/11, it was, I saw a lot of things that I wish I didn't see, and experienced a lot of things that obviously we all wish we didn't experience. And I think for a long time, I felt really guilty about that because, so many people lost so much more, and here I am trying to process all of these things, and without really getting into the long and arduous details, it was a very difficult decade. I had not even understanding what PTSD was during this process, but just it was a very dark time in my life. I pushed away pretty much everybody, dove into work, and really just lost me. In myself. And I was very fortunate. I had gone to a doctor by the name of Dr. Julie Holland, who is one of the world's, in my opinion, foremost leading authorities on cannabis, has written a number of books, sits on a number of clinical trials. And she had turned me on to GW Pharmaceuticals way back when, and I started studying it. And lo and behold, after a number of years of really trying to peel back this onion and understand how this plant that has had this 30,000-year relationship with humanity through the lens of health and wellness is now vilified, and this is your brain on drugs, and this is a counterculture, and Cheech and Chong, and the Grateful Dead, and bad.
Right.
So we call it the rabbit hole for the intellectually curious. Once you go down it and you start to realize realize that the history here and that this was actually weaponized in the 20s to stop Mexican immigration, whereas Eli Lilly and Merck, or Eli Lilly and I believe Merck, were already prescribing cannabis for a number of indications. So the hypocrisy just screams, and the social justice screams, and the efficacy-driven solutions that we've started to see scream to take a deeper look here. But for me, going on that Western medicine protocol to deal with the PTSD and really losing myself in the process, as I, over time, found CBD and just extricated myself off of all that pharmaceutical poison. And I found myself again, or as my kids will tell you, I was less of an asshole, every day. I found the person who I lost, all those years ago, and it just changed everything. Changed my marriage, changed my parenting, it changed my reality. So here I am, having gone through this, and I'm sitting across the table from somebody who's gone through this too, but from a different indication, from a completely different spectrum. And I sitting there, and that's when we first started thinking about this term efficacious agility. Like, this is not a one-off. This is not for pain. This is not for seizures. This is not for appetite or nausea. This
well-being.
This is for wellness. This is for homeostasis. This is for producing balance within your body. And we're just scratching the surface. I mean, people right now, you talk about sort of the chasm between perception and reality. That's where the profits are, right? So if we look at this and say, okay, well, all market moves are characterized by denial, migration, panic, right? Well, it's federally illegal. Most people think it's about getting high. And you just turn on the TV and everybody's going to tell you, what a farce this is. Okay. What's that cusp into migration? I think it's banking. Right? And then you're going to see these financial products. You're going to see Wall Street, the Wall Streetification of cannabis, which will allow for institutions or for Wall Street analysts to cover it, which will give the cover your ass for institutions to invest in it, because they could point to Goldman or Morgan or Bank of America and say, no, they said to buy it. So we can buy it now, because that's how Wall Street works. And we think that migration is going to be powerful. We think that last phase, denial, migration, panic, that last phase, panic or FOMO, is going to be triggered by the realization that this is good for you, that this doesn't cause cancer, this could kill cancer cells. And careful saying that in this environment, because people look at you funny, but follow the science, right? And that's why we say follow the science. It's going to take some time. We think we're going to hear something even by the end of this year about brain cancer, but we'll hear it when we hear it. Right? If you follow the GW Pharmaceutical story, they couldn't release the secondary endpoints of their phase 2 trial for glioblastoma, brain cancer, because too many people were still surviving. That was in February of 2017.
Wow.
It's now June of 2019, and we still haven't heard. So there's a lot there. But, again, right now people are looking at this and saying this is a vice, this is, a fringe thing, and this is not going to be a sustainable market. We look at this and we see a $2 to $3 trillion industry in a decade.
Wow. That's exciting. That's exciting to be a part of. So and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you would still call this then you're still an early bull part of the cycle, as it terms to early bull, middle bull, late bull, top kind of thing. We're still in the early bulls.
Well, I think it's going to come in waves and phases, right? So we start cultivation and that being really manifesting through the Canadian LPs and sort of as the vehicle to play that. But I think the market's starting to understand that front end, which is the flower, that's not as sexy, right? That's an input. Where this gets really interesting is for people who use cannabis as an ingredient, so that as the price of flower goes down, margins improve because their input costs are going down, right? And that's where a lot of people get lost on this, because they're thinking, well, flower's going down and the business is going away. No, flower goes down, it's going to open up all of these end products, this ubiquity of end products that we think is going to manifest through society.
I try to draw, for trading relationships, I try to draw the parallel between, you were happy to buy airlines when the price of gasoline gets cut in half, right? As the input cost goes down, their margin, expands. This is very much the same thing, whereas as the price of the flower goes down, the margin of the people that are making the end products, like you described, are making more money. So that's why I enjoy the timing of the price action in the markets right now, where, there are obvious big runs away from the moving averages when, the stock market is raging and there are positive cannabis earnings on the tape, or just generally positive narrative headlines. And, you'll see them, obviously form a top formation and then pull back into support levels. And then now it'll be, times like this where you and I are sitting waiting for the next headline. We don't know what it is, but we know it's coming, and we just don't know when it's coming. So to me, that's been the setup that consistently happens, and I think the waves that you're discussing. So that's how I found the most success in playing it. On this most recent dip, what sort of what's your approach to the most recent dip? Are you going to continue to accumulate all the names that you have? Are you looking to make first steps into another name? Are you trading around the whole thing, or how are you working it right now?
The answer is yes. I mean, I've been trading for 30 years, and this is as dicey as a market as I've ever seen. I mean, It's pretty crazy. I understand why. If in fact generalist funds are exiting the space, I get it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the volatility is not for everyone. Having traded through, Orange County and the Thai bot and Dotcom and the great financial crisis, you would think that you're prepared for this type of volatility, but this really puts it to shame in terms of the types of movements that we're seeing. I think last year, you had 20% drawdowns in the global cannabis space. You had 55% drawdowns in the global, and that's in one calendar year.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's just, and this is all, again, we talk about this a lot, like, our catalysts are in front of us, where are we? Like, I think it depends where you're talking about. I think for Canadian LPs, it's probably late stage. I think for U.S. MSOs that are trading 3 times 2020 earnings on the aggregate, as opposed to 10 times for Canada, I think that you're buying growth at value prices in a lot of these cases. If you do your work, you're going to get yourself some really good companies that are mispriced, right? There's a lot of mispriced merchandise. You don't have Wall Street analysts going out there to defend these names because none of them cover these U.S. names. So these are just trading all over the place. So if you actually do the work and you can put a lens on these things, as a Wall Street analyst will put the lens on, you're laying in wait for an efficient market. That's the plan. Right. So I think the U.S. is early. I think things like biosynthetics, are super early. I think Australia is super early. The world is coming online here. So it's an inside out from the state level here, but it's also an outside in from other countries.
You've got a really good handle on the global cannabis picture. Could you describe how you call sort of Canada the head and the U.S. body and Australia the tail, and a little bit just sort of what's in that body and why you've got it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for Canada, you have, they were the only game in town for a while, particularly for the names that are listed on the U.S., kind of, whether that's Kronos or Canopy or even Aurora. There's about 7 or 8 of them right now. Village Farms is a name that we own that we think is misunderstood. But we look at Canada and we're looking for situations as opposed to exposure, because for the most part, we think Canada is overvalued. We don't want to short it per se, and a lot of people are short Canada right now and long U.S. We want to find the names that we like, that we want to buy, that we can buy lower, or if we can buy lower, we're willing to buy lower, because, like I said, these movements are outrageous. But when you look at, we kind of we frame the marketplace by sectors, right? So we have the Canadians, we have the U.S. kind, we have, we call the CBD plays, we have biotech, and then we have international, whether, there's Colombian exposure, there's Australian exposure. We're less keen on South America right now because we just don't see the exports that I think a lot of analysts are expecting to see from them immediately. If you think about sort of the way the world's going to work once cannabis opens up, every country is going to want their jobs. Everybody's going to want their own revenue. Yeah. So I think it's not going to be as robust an international landscape, we think, but certainly there's going to be opportunities for around the world. And you could pick up the Australian majors for a couple $100 million market cap right now, and you only have to be right on a couple of those to be really right.
Yeah. So would you mind sharing what are some of the names that you like outside the U.S. and Canada?
Sure. Well, I mean, listen, we've talked about Elixinol for some time, and that ran from about $1.50 to $6. It's now finally pulling back. It's, I think, trading between 3.5 and 4 right now. But we love Elixinol, not only for their CBD brand, but their footprint that they're growing internationally. They have a relationship with Japan, which is notoriously difficult to do business with. Shinzo Abe suffers from Crohn's. His wife is a huge hemp advocate, and they use elixirenol products. So they're actually the only brand that can advertise in Japan right now.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is interesting. And certainly, it's, good product, strong management team, all the things you want to see. They just did a financing, I think, last week. So no rush, but certainly, as we're looking towards the next phase of where, the space is going, we think that they're, in Australia, they're probably best in breed there.
Now, have you found any useful hedges in this market at all? Is there anything, are you just shorting other names against some of the names that you're long? Have you found anything that's a good hedge to sort of protect your whole cannabis length position, or is it just long short within the industry?
We're not shorting cannabis much. We'll tactically short, like if there are tactical shorts in individual names that we could set up a risk reward profile through the option market, we'll look at that. But, where we see the market going and where we see the space going and opening up, and I'm talking more for U.S. names right now specific, but a lot of the up and coming names, not necessarily the names that have already had these massive runs up north. We just, we think that the best is yet to come for these names. And we think that, as we look at the U.S. space in particular, we'll see the fangification of these names. There's about 10 of them right now. We think it'll, either consolidate to 4 or, 4 will emerge. Some will drop out, but these are going to be the names that we think are going to be, the Dell, Intel, Microsoft, and Cisco of this cycle.
There's no gun to your head, but in 10 years, who are the big 4?
Oh, geez.
We got to talk about it.
God, I don't know. I mean, we love Green Thumb, Cresco, and we think they're doing, some good things. It's hard to tell. I mean, you look at what Canopy's doing with Acreage and started to build that footprint.
Yeah.
So there's going to be, a lot of these Canadian guys are going to use their rich paper to back into better multiples through accretive deals. And that's sort of the bull case for the space. And one of the reasons we're less inclined to short Canada outright, because we do think that the majors are going to be part of the solution going forward. But Green Thumb, I'd say, Cresco, and I don't know. I'm going to throw Iantis on there just because it's really getting hammered because of some news that came out yesterday, and the stock's for sale all over the street. And I think it's trading close to $4 right now. And I think this is a company that you can come back in a few years and it's going to be a 3 or 4 bagger.
Same thing: branding, footprint, management, the whole package.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, the knock on them today, as we're sitting here, is that they repriced their options for their key employees after a merger with MPX. And I have no problem with that on its face. It happens all the time. Would have preferred to see a press release framing the decision and articulating why the decision was made. They came out and said, you know what, we should have gotten in front of this, and we apologize. And okay, let's move on. They haven't killed anybody. The business is still the business.
Right.
I think technically it's breaking, but when you see things that are so oversold that are just now technically breaking, you have all this emotional selling on top of it.
Yeah.
That's when I think it pays to be a contrarian.
Yep. I have been sort of following the money a little bit. I followed the money when Constellation invested in Canopy. I invested in Canopy. When Molson partnered up with Hexo, I invested in Hexo. Nelson Peltz is now on the board of Kronos Group. Do you see a name out there that had...
Aurora.
Oh, excuse me, Aurora. Do you see a name out there that is sort of dying for a partner that you think somebody is going to come along and pair up with, either in the beverage industry or in the pharmaceutical industry, sort of an orphan that's out there that you think is a well-operated shop that nobody's latched onto yet? Or
I mean, we think Organigram's great. We have a position on Organigram. They have, one of the few LPs that have not given a nod to the biosynthetic side, and they have good management and they're executing, which is big, and a lot of guys up there aren't. So Organigram's a name to watch. It just listed on the NASDAQ, I think, last month. OGI is a symbol. It's optionable. If you want to try to frame your risk profile there. I also think what Aurora is trying to do is pretty interesting in that rather than partner with one particular brand partner, they've created what's effectively a wagon wheel where they can look at brand partners for each spoke, for each vertical. So whether it's cosmetics and vanity, whether it's beverages, whether it's nutraceuticals, what have you. I think that's an interesting model. The execution will be the devil's in the details of execution, but the ability to partner with best in breed across verticals, I think, is potentially a game changer in terms of the way these models are working.
So you and I both traded through the 90s, which I consider to be the golden age of desk trading. Quoting clients, an extremely aggressive, frenetic pace all day long, loud, boisterous trading desks. And I'll be totally honest with you, since I pivoted to the world of being a journalist, I miss breaking phones. I miss those intense situations on the trading desk when, it was ultimate set of competition and somebody just took your lunch from you, and that was part of the deal, and you were able to express that frustration and everybody around you was going to have to understand it. Do you have any war stories that you'd like to share from either Morgan Stanley or the hedge fund days that sort of that rings true with or makes you recall?
No, I think anybody that's been doing this for this long has a fair amount of war stories. I mean, 30 years, geez.
Right.
I remember, you're right. I mean, you used to quote, the lines weren't taped, your name was your word. And it was it was a noble profession once upon a time, and we were greasing the wheels of capitalism. I mean, it was powerful. Now you're just, you're bad people if you're in finance. I mean, it's just amazing, the social mood. But I remember I was 25 and I had pretty much taught myself the ropes at Morgan Stanley on the equity derivative desk and feeling pretty good about myself. 25 years old, I got my seat on the desk. I turned the biotech and the bank book into profit centers. I was aggressive. We had a customer, biggest bank trader in the street, who came in and wanted a quote on letter I, first interstate calls. And, they were 50 up. I made him 500 up. And next thing you know, the guy's building a position limit. And I finally get the common sense to say, is there anything I should know here? And he starts telling me how he thinks they're a takeout target. And, he has a high degree of confidence. I said, great, thank you. And I pretty much over the course of the next month or so, 2 months, traded around this thing, was going with the customer, was long, even when I was bearish, I was only long 50. When I was bullish, I was long 150. And it was just riding this thing, telling everybody that would listen, you got to be involved in this thing. My customer knows something. And I remember it was, I think it was a Thursday, about 3:45, right before the bell. And my salesperson, Kim DeSpigna, said, how you making letter I? And I'm thinking to myself, I thought he was position limit long, but I'll show you 500 at wherever they were trading. And he said, no, I need a two-sided market. He's a seller.
Gotcha.
He's got 8,000, he had a whole position for sale. This is like all of a sudden the most important day of my life. And, I said, all right, I bought the first 500. I said, let me get in shape and I'll make you a bid. And I bought the first 500 and I got myself in shape the best that I could, sold a lot of my longs, and got ready to, put an aggressive bid on for the whole position.
Yeah.
And I bid him, and he said, great bid. I'm going to sit tight. We'll do it tomorrow morning.
Wow.
So, right. That was my thought.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, suffice to say, the next morning, after not sleeping much, I was the first one in the office, and I'll never forget the bank trader who traded the listed stocks came up to me with a big smile, and he said, you're still involved First Interstate, right? I said, why?
Why are you asking me that?
And he said, well, you're still long, right? Why? And so, I excused myself. I went to the men's room, splashed some water on my face, and I heard the entire trading floor erupt.
Holy
Guess what
shit.
happened was there was a deal in the works. It fell apart. Customer wanted to sell the calls. Wells Fargo turned around and made a hostile bid, which at the time was unheard of. And not only that, Morgan Stanley was the banker, so we were restricted. So here I am, what would have been a multiple seven-figure win, turned into a multiple seven-figure loss. I'm 25 years old.
You've got job security on your mind.
Job security. I was convinced. I sat there. I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't eat lunch. I sat there. I wasn't giving up there. They would have to pry that seat from me. And, at the end of the day, about 6 o'clock, I was the last one on the desk, and the man, MD called me in. He asked me what my thought process was, and I explained my thought process. I was still up a lot for the year, but, you're only as good as your last trade. And I was pretty sure I was going to learn that lesson the hard way at Morgan Stanley. And, he told me to come back and shake it off. Whew. The mechanics of the swing, he said, were clean.
Reasonable, right?
And I ended up getting promoted that year. I was, I think, the youngest vice president at Morgan Stanley at the time, which was, the last thing I expected that day. I really thought that it was the end of the line for me. But, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger.
Yeah.
I still, get a little nervous telling that story. This is now 25 years later. But it happens, and you have to take the good with the bad in this business.
It's part of who you are at this point as a trader, right?
Oh yeah, I still, every time I think about that story, I get a little bit of a cold sweat. But
Yeah.
it's this is the life we've chosen. And I wrote a tweet before I came in here talking about how this cannabis, the downside dance is continuing, and we've seen this movie before. This feels almost like December-esque in its one-way pukage, but it was painful in December, but it was also the right time to go shopping, and I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't know from what the broader market does right now as we sit here, tickling all-time highs as, we seemingly have one foot on the banana peel and the other foot on the, on a pretty significant sell-off. But, the markets are, in strange days right now.
That's a perfect segue into where I want to go, because I follow you closely on Twitter and personally in our conversations, and I appreciated something. You were having a conversation with somebody on Twitter saying that this isn't the sort of old school baseball that our dads were playing, you know what I mean? And I latched onto that with my dad that came from 30 years on Wall Street. I know exactly the old school baseball that you're talking about.
Right.
Can you speak to how both market structure, market perception, market liquidity have changed, and sort of what you were talking about to address that a little bit more?
Somebody had asked if it was the seventh inning. I said, I feel like it's the 17th inning, and this is the steroid era, and the ball is juiced. I mean, this is not our father's stock market or baseball analogy anymore. I mean, the way I see it, and everybody has an opinion on this, but I think the great financial crisis, I think what the U.S. government effectively did, and I wrote about this in real time, was they bought the cancer and they sold the car crash. Right? They inhaled all the toxic debt and all, if you think of the Green Mile and that was our system, right? And who's to say that wasn't the right decision? If General Electric wasn't making payroll and there was no ATMs working and people couldn't feed it was a very
real time.
In real time, it was the devil. Let's just keep anarchy at bay for the time being. And it was close. I don't think most people realize how close we were. It was real close.
Right.
So I'm not begrudging the decision. I'm just, as I wrote at the time, this didn't disappear. It just went airborne. It went viral. And as I wrote at the time, and I think it's sort of demonstrated over time that this indeed proved true, was that ingesting that cancer and selling that car crash, we effectively succumbed to what would be what I said at the time would be a tricky trifecta. And we wrote about this, I think, in 2007 for the first time, of societal acrimony, social unrest, geopolitical conflict. Societal acrimony, people were like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I just think
it showed up outside our window.
Because it was a disproportionate, response to a crisis where the rich got richer, the poor got poorer, the middle class was eroded by, and squeezed out between the lifestyles of the rich and a struggle to exist.
And continue to be,
And continue to be.
Yeah.
Facts aren't insults. This just is what happened.
Yeah.
So, as we see the societal acrimony, Occupy Wall Street, the riots in Europe, right? Social unrest. That becomes a bit of a prophecy. And then geopolitical conflict. I would argue that we've been in a world war for a number of years without a single bullet being fired. It's been fought digitally. It's been fought economically. It's been fought through currencies. It's been fought through a lot of vehicles that aren't conventional warfare.
Totally.
But it still has occurred, and it's been, now my sense is that the stock market in the finance-based global economy, where you have so many people tied, their fortunes tied to the stock market has become a bit of a matter of national security, right? And I think you're seeing that in the Federal Reserve, and I get it in terms of the stakes here. But I think if you're looking at this and you're saying, whereas I grew up on the stock market and I looked at fundamentals, I looked at technicals, I looked at structural, I looked at psychology. Those were the four legs. And if I could build a table and those four legs were stable, the table would be stable. Now it's a giant game of chicken where you have structural deflation on one side and you have the global central banks on the other. And I think structural deflation is the internet, right? Right? If you wanted to buy a pencil, you could find a pencil by a 1/12 of a penny cheaper than the other pencil, which is great if you want to buy a pencil, but if you make those pencils, you're fucked. Right? And that's sort of the structural deflation that has now consumed society, and you have this effort to keep things reflated, where if you're taking a closer look, what we actually have is inflation in things that we need and deflation in things that we want. So whether it's clothing, food, energy, healthcare,
Education,
if it's plasmas, laptops, cell phones,
Right.
price goes down. So it's masking it on the aggregate, but the effect for the individual American is pretty significant.
Exactly. And I feel like the market and journalism in general has done a good job at not pointing the finger up until now in the right direction, right? I think that we're finally getting, peeling back the onion on the big four. I'm grateful that Scott Galloway wrote his book and created all kinds of awareness about it. And I think that we're finally starting to see it play out now, where we're at least discussing antitrust. It may make the shares and the company stronger if they're broken up in the end into different pieces, as we've seen obviously before in history. But to me, I still can't get over the fact that they have been completely reckless with the Constitution and with the law, amongst the clients that they've been supposedly serving. So to me, that's where we're at an inflection point. What do you see happening to the big four? Do you think that they continue to go on, consume everyone's data, continue to grow into bigger trillion-dollar companies and put everybody away? Or is there going to be finally an end to this and the market finally gets oxygenated and we have some competition in there?
Yeah, I think the honest answer is I don't know. I wrote, I think it was last year, that I thought it was the end of FANG. I thought, just a peak FANG is what I wrote. And they were all-time highs. I actually was talking about the psychology surrounding FANG, and people were thinking I was talking about the price top right there. But I think we're at peak FANG in terms of our infatuation.
I'm with you.
And this was last February. So maybe that was peak FANG. But I think the price has to play itself out. They're over-owned. We all know that. And I don't know, I get it. People need alpha and they're going to chase the same stocks, but I don't think that's sustainable. I actually think that, once cannabis is better understood and people understand the growth, right? And I'm talking about, when they say, okay, well, cannabis is a $300 billion global, industry, from a revenue standpoint for the flower, and say that's a TAM, that's a total addressable market. No, that's 300 billion of ingredients. That's going to go into trillions.
A much bigger market.
A much bigger market, right? And the market isn't educated enough to make that, and money managers don't really understand that it's not about getting high as much as it's about their ingredients for a number of things, most of which are non-euphoric, most of which aren't going to get you high. BMW is putting hemp in car doors, nothing to do with getting you high. Right? So those are the types of opportunities I don't think the market's prepared for. And I think as the market educates themselves on that space, I think they're going to see that this is where the growth is. And the growth is in the rear view for FANG.
I agree, and I feel like we saw peak Silicon Valley, I call it, rather than calling it peak FANG. I feel like we can call it peak Silicon Valley in 2018 with the Salesforce.com building going up and the Chase Center going up for the basketball team. And so we'll see if the sort of sentimental signals start to play out.
But I do think that in terms of Google and Amazon, the sum of the parts probably significantly larger than the whole. So for everybody that's sort of looking at sort of breaking them up and showing them, I think that the wealth creation there would be pretty spectacular.
It could be.
Facebook, I'm not a fan, but for the reason that I think everybody's not a fan and they feel a bit duped by it. We'll see about that.
They're going to have different paths, each four of them, I think. So we'll follow.
And Netflix, just as somebody who's been in the content business before, that's a tough business, man.
Oh, man.
So I get it. I get the growth and all that, but they're now a movie studio, and I think that there's going to be a more stringent lens put on their multiple, as such.
They are starting to look like very mature companies, no matter how you slice it, right? So that at least we can agree upon. And the stock price, we'll see what happens as time goes on. So as a cannabis believer and a cannabis investor with 3 teenagers in my home, I have to make a big decision how to posture the cannabis world for my children, in front of my children. And as a fellow dad of teenagers and one I tremendously respect on the opposite shore of Long Island, I would like to know, what do we tell our kids about the cannabis market?
The truth. I mean, the one thing I've learned by raising teenagers is that they're the truth is the only way to go. And that includes the fact that if you're not fully developed, this is potentially very harmful for you if you're not taking it for a particular condition, right? As a recreational, as a social lubricant, You want your body to fully develop naturally. And I told my kids, I said, listen, you're going to do what you're going to do with your friends. I'm not going to tell you what to do or not going to do, although I can tell you as somebody who's been studying this plant for 10 years that it's not good for you until you're fully developed. Paradoxically, as you get older, the older you get, the better it is for you, right? Because the tone of your endocannabinoid system changes as you age, which is why we're seeing the uptake from the seniors across the world. Because it's almost like greasing the wheel, because your body is not producing these endocannabinoids at the same tone as it did when you were younger, as a function of your diet and exercise and heredity and things of that nature. But as a kid, I tell my kids, it's almost like taking the day off from developing if you're going to ingest cannabis. I still, between you, me, and the fence post, I think between cigarettes, alcohol, and cannabis, I think cannabis is by far the healthiest, right? But once you're fully developed, right, as you age, then you're going to start to see the benefits across the wellness sphere as well.
I really appreciate that answer, because that's what I want to tell my children, is that not until your brain is fully developed should be even going near this. And so if we can, I guess we'll both call ourselves successful if we can pull that off in any capacity as dads. So another thing that we have in common was made blindly apparent to me by walking around your house. I feel like I'm walking around my house when I'm in your house, and that's because there are rock and roll pictures all over the place. There's Grateful Dead concert posters, and you and I both had our hearts ripped out last October 2017 when Tom Petty died. Tell me what Tom Petty means to you and why.
Wow. Every stage of my life, from college on up, he's been an anthem for my life. And, from my brother and I would go to these concerts, you probably went to half dozen anyway. It was always just the ability to sort of have that time with him. And then when my wife and I reconnected after 15 years, thereabouts, when we first started dating, when we reconnected, I realized she'd never been to a Tom Petty concert. I took her up to Saratoga. We went to a Tom Petty concert up there.
Awesome.
Our daughter was conceived not necessarily at the show, but at the weekend. So it was
that's a beautiful story.
So it's just been, it was heartbreaking. It's as we get older, a lot of our hallmarks, a lot of our milestones, a lot of our memories just become just that. It's amazing to me. I turned 50 in 10 days. Never thought, parts of my life, my young and reckless days, I was, dubious if I would actually get here. Now that I'm here, I just want to do so much more with it, which is why, we always talk about, the definition of professional nirvana, right, is to do what you love with people you respect, serve the greater good if you can, which is why we try to educate people about cannabis. Obviously, we want to participate economically. And we just think that the street and the world is offsides. If you have the patience and you have the diligence and you have the ability to sync your time horizon with your risk profile, again, 2 to 4 years, I think. I just don't see anything out there that's going to touch us as an investment or as one of, as we talk about God's medicine, as something that I think is going to really change the way this world lives and takes care of itself.
Well, it looks to me like you are getting closer to living out your definition of professional success and happiness, and I'm going to be proud to witness it for the next 50 years, and I look forward to continue to learn from you about and follow this sector, trade this sector, and remain good friends, and say thanks for coming on here today, man.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, Todd.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks. Well, that was a really fulfilling conversation with Todd Harrison. We learned how to follow the science in the cannabis market. We heard about a few of his best investable opportunities, and we got his global macro view. For Real Vision, this is Tony Greer. Thank you for watching.
So I hope that video helped you think about investing, finance, trading in a slightly different way, hopefully open your world up a little bit, and got you thinking about how to make better decisions in the future. And if that's something you want to help your customers do as well, you could consider gifting them Real Vision subscriptions. It could help them be more confident, maybe make some more trades, or just understand the financial world in a clearer and maybe unconventional sense. Actually, IG Group did just that. They gifted 20,000 of their customers with Real Vision subscriptions to maybe encourage them to trade a little more, invest a little more, and just be smarter when it comes to their money and what's going on in the financial world around them. If that's something you want to help out your customers with, you can email us, enterprise@realvision.com. We'll hook you up.